presentation today, Piety, Politics, and Participation, Raising Jewish Voices for Good. I do have a couple disclaimers before I begin. I guess I'm not supposed to probably be looking up at the camera. I will look at the people here in the room. And the good thing about COVID is nobody will be seeing my roots because I've let my hair grow out during the pandemic. So, but I am a Jew. I am not a Jewish scholar. Preparing for today was a little like writing a term paper, and thankfully, Google to the rescue. I am a former elected official. I served 16 years on the Irvine City Council, 4 of those years as the directly elected mayor of Irvine. I ran 7 campaigns. I won 6. The one campaign I did not win was for Congress in 2010. And amongst the many things about the 2010 election cycle was that Joe Lieberman was on the ballot with Al Gore. You know, we certainly have noted some firsts in vice presidents, and in our first husband now, Kamala Harris's husband, being Jewish, but there was a little bit more interest in 2010 about those of us who were running for office who were also Jewish because Lieberman was in the race. And I remember being asked by a reporter whether I thought my Jewish heritage had played any particular role in my political activities, and it absolutely did. You know, I started my campaigning as a high school student when I was in B'nai B'rith youth organization. I was very active in Hadassah and assumed many positions there too. I did not ever think I was going to run for public office, and it was a number of issues in my community, but one particular issue that got me to step out of the cheap seats and into the arena. And I certainly wasn't the first Jewish person to run in the city of Irvine or anywhere else here in Orange County, or to serve. But, you know, when we came here to Irvine in 1986, there was not as much active Jewish participation overall. And in our country, you know, we also have a history of Jews having played very significant roles in all aspects of civic and political life. But, sorry, my printer failed me, and so I'm going to be forced to work off my phone. But you know, numerous luminaries that we can point to from the Jewish community. And because today is Yom Kippur and we're focused on Teshuva, and I thought a bit about, you know, almost like proactive Teshuva, that, you know, while we are being judged by our actions and deeds of the past year, hopefully many of us have done more good than bad, and that when we are being evaluated and weighed for inclusion in the Book of Life, those things are being taken into consideration. The Day of Atonement does sort of call upon us and remind us to take responsibility for our own personal responsibility for our role in the political, the economic, environmental, and social well-being of our communities and our society and of our world. I grew up, as many Jews do, in a home where my mother was active in the League of Women Voters, when the League of Women Voters was sort of like the seal of approval. You know, these were just women who believed that women should be politically engaged, that everybody should be politically engaged, and worked to make sure voters were informed. And so that was a huge influence in my life. My dad was an anchorman on television in Buffalo, New York, if we have any Buffalonians here. My dad, you know, probably, you know, beyond just being one of the most respected media personalities in the history of certainly Buffalo and Western New York. My dad's professional name was actually his name, which was Irv Weinstein. It wasn't always that way. Early in his radio broadcasting career, he was given other names because he was in places where they probably thought Irv Weinstein wouldn't win the day. My favorite is, I think, when he was in Parkersburg, West Virginia, they gave him the name Adam Story because they thought people would psychologically think of Adam as the first man and then Story, and they would think my dad was the first man with the story. But just a little factoid there. But my dad did have a very successful career in the city of Buffalo, which was not predominantly Jewish, but which did have a large Jewish community, as Irv Weinstein, which, you know, I really feel helped to empower me. I think that had my father, like so many people in the public eye, been forced to change his name, he started in broadcasting in the 1950s, been forced to change his name in order to work in his profession, I think I probably would have noted that and assumed that there were places I couldn't be and things I couldn't do. And I was aware anti-Semitism existed in my community as well. But I think through osmosis, I definitely got the message that being active in your community was a value that was important as a Jew. And I like to think that really the roots of my political career really do come from being Jewish. I've also been known, since I know that the only people watching me right now are people who don't need a nap, you know, I have been known to point out that if you can be involved politically in the Jewish community, you can be involved politically anywhere, because the politics of community is often even more complicated than what we think of as traditional politics. So, you know, the commandment to take action, spiritual as well as ethical, it really rests as the centerpiece of Jewish life. Our work for justice can help inscribe us all in the book of life, but the work begins with Teshuva, Tefillah, and Tzedakah, and where it ends and how far it extends is really up to us. We need to contemplate and reckon with the deep injustices that are baked into our economic and political structures and criminal justice system, our education and health systems, environmental stewardship, and so much more. It's not just, you know, I don't know if President Obama originated this, but there's kind of a thing that people say now is, that's what I do. And I said, it's not just what we do, it's who we are. As Maimonides, someone I did not know well, but as Maimonides says in the Mishnah Torah, if you live in a community that does not allow for ethical communal action, you should move. And I think that, you know, that resonates, because how many people live in communities, Jew or non-Jew, where they feel that openly advocating for what they believe in is neither safe nor welcome nor respected. And I think one of the things that Jews do, because we're not the largest portion of the population, we certainly understand marginalization, we're not always the first to be welcome to the table. But I think when Jews step out and take a stand on issues, they make it safe for everyone, because we are the canary in the coal mine. And if the Jew can get away with, you know, standing up for human rights and civil rights and women's rights and the environment and reforms in so many areas, I think it does add strength to other people's backbones. And it's a model. You know, I don't actually, certainly in my own life, I don't think I ever did anything because as a Jew, I was raised to believe that I had to, or that it was expected of me. I really do think it's in our DNA. And in my research for this conversation today, you know, I found articles where people were making the case, Jewish people were making the case that the Jewish belief that we were instrumental and integral to the civil rights movement and other social movements, and that is reflective of the tenets of our faith, that's not true. That's sort of our fairy tale that we tell ourselves, that because we were oppressed in other places, we understand oppression. Because we have been marginalized and discriminated against, we can understand the human experience. And, you know, I'm looking at Scott Spitzer, who's in academia. I always said to my friends in academia, you have the luxury of living in a theoretical world where everything comes together in your head or possibly in a scholarly paper. I think the truth is that it is in our DNA. And I don't know of any Jew who infers or suggests or states that because Jews have been involved in social causes, in movements, in reform, that somehow our participation is superior to other people's participation or negates the work of others. I mean, nobody believes that the Jews alone could have caused civil rights to be enacted, the Civil Rights Act to be enacted in America. The fight was in the streets, and the fight was amongst those who were and continue to be most oppressed. But I think Jews have every right to take pride in the fact that we are willing to stand with others when they are struggling to secure their own rights and to secure a better life for themselves. I know we have people here in the Jewish Collaborative who are very active in the refugee service and support movement, and there are many organizations, Jewish World Watch amongst them, and others. You know, I think it's interesting, and I'm reflecting on the talk last night with Rabbi Levy and Lisa Armony discussing sort of how Jews are viewed outside the Jewish community and how our intentions are assessed and, you know, our motives are considered and all of that. And I think, you know, regrettably for some people, and right now, and it was discussed last night, it's, you know, thank you very much for your concern, but this isn't your fight and you're not welcome in the room, you know? And by the way, you're actually now part of the problem, and your, you know, imperialistic activities in the Middle East have not gone unnoticed. And, you know, it's interesting. I mean, you know, everything's interesting to me. But it's interesting because part of our history is also helping to improve circumstances wherever we are, and then having the majority population wherever we are see our participation as a threat rather than an asset, and then the discrimination and oppression that often follows. I'm remembering being in Spain, in Girona, where I believe Maimonides was born, and being at a Jewish museum that was a former synagogue in times of old that had then been appropriated with the expulsion of the Jews and used for a lot of other things, including like rending tallow from, you know, animals or, you know, things that clearly were not consistent with its original use. And in this museum, there were cards in different languages for visitors, and the English one said the Jews fled. They weren't expelled. The Jews fled Spain in 1492 after an unsuccessful uprising. And I thought, was the uprising sort of you're forcing my conversion, you're raping my daughters, you're appropriating my, I mean, it was so absurd. And now, of course, there's an effort in Spain to get Jews to come back because Jews were so much a part of the lifeblood of Spain. And when the Jews were expelled, the whole character of the country changed substantially. It's just interesting to me. It's like most people, if they want to help, they want to support your cause, you're just only too happy to have them provide what they can. But, and it's not true in all cases, and I'm certain that Jewish contributions are appreciated by people of all faiths and cultures in many places where Jews have made an impact. But it's hurtful in a way that's very hard to describe when the things that we do that are part and parcel of our Jewish soul are viewed with suspicion, are viewed with derision, and are turned into something ugly and untoward when it comes from a good place. We're givers. We're people who want our own community to do better and want all communities to do better.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
In your personal time in the political arena, did you ever encounter that, or no? That you have just I'm curious.
Well,
I don't know.
not over. No, I'm thinking of a particular occasion when a colleague of mine on the city council took an uncomfortable interest in why I did not believe in Christ. And was, I answered his questions as thoughtfully as I could, but they just kept coming. And, it's a, being the minority in the population, thinking about the many times that we, go into a store and are wished Happy Easter or Merry Christmas. I'm never offended. I understand people are celebrating these holidays. I never feel the need to say, excuse me, I'm Jewish. If somebody persists, they're kind of like, so what are you getting your kids for Christmas? And I usually say, well, we're Jewish, but not with any hostility. But in politics, in places where there are large Jewish communities, I think Jews who run for public office feel pretty comfortable. Like I think in LA, if you're a Jew in public office, you don't feel, you can look at every level of government and you're going to see other Jews. You might even see them at your synagogue on the high holidays.
Jews like to vote.
Right. Los Angeles has a Jewish mayor. They've had Jews on the Board of Supervisors. They've had Jews who are mayors of many of the cities in LA County. I'm sure many of the schools in Los Angeles, if they were open these last couple days, there were not any major assignments given or tests. But when you live in communities, I lived in Waco, Texas for a few years before I came here to Orange County, and I have told people that I think I was meant to live in Waco, Texas to prepare me for the political environment here in Orange County. It's different now, it's better, but it needs more evolving. It's still a little more parochial than it needs to be. But I also remember in Waco, I worked for the school district. I was an itinerant teacher for the visually impaired, and there were two church ladies who I worked out of the district office, who kind of worked in administration, as secretaries. And they were just outside my office, and they learned that I was Jewish. And one of them said, oh, we went to Israel with our church group, and we had the cutest little Israeli guide. She was so cute. and she made that k sound that y'all make, which I assume is ch. And I got a menorah, and we use it as a centerpiece, and I just remember thinking, like, we're not Dorothy, we're not in Kansas anymore. But I think when you have those experiences, like, I don't regret that I've had experiences of feeling alone in a room because I'm a Jew. I think there are assets and liabilities to being in the majority and being in the minority. But I think that whenever you're in a situation where you are required to learn about other people's cultures and other people's communities, you come away with a lot more information and tools than you started with. And so I do think, as somebody in politics and people in political leadership, that you have a role to play to not just introduce people to your table, but to be present at other people's tables. And I will tell you, just as an aside, I don't know if it has anything to do with Teshuva or Yom Kippur, but at this point, I also haven't eaten for the last 23 hours, so hopefully I'll be forgiven for anything. But I had people in the Jewish community who took issue with support that I received in my community from the Muslim community, who very much appreciated my service because I got elected just before 9/11, and one of the things that we did very well was make sure that in a community where we had just opened the New Horizons school, a Muslim day school, that there were no incidents that occurred. And I do think that once you step into leadership, you understand that opinions are cheap. The only time you have all the answers is when you're sitting in front of the TV and you think, well, if I was there, I would do fill in the blank. More people need to step up and step in. And because there is no magic wand, there is no crystal ball. Last night, Peter Levy talked about a situation with a school in South County, and I knew about this situation, where the principal sent out a message of generalized support in the wake of the bombings and the collateral damage in Gaza. And I knew a little more about the backstory because his administrative assistant is my neighbor. And she called me and said, oh my goodness, we've just stepped into something, and can you help? And I spoke to him. He was a very sweet man. His intentions were absolutely pure. But he was also led to do what he did by somebody who I think was looking to have him do something that was more overtly political. I think he was simply naive. Still have to take responsibility, and I think he handled it in the aftermath as well as he could. But I've had those experiences where my credibility has been challenged and my motivations have been impugned. And you have to be pretty strong as a public official to endure the shards of glass and grenades that get launched. I am an advocate for democracy. I'm sort of veering into a different area, but I am, and I think Jews have been advocates for democracy. I don't know of any large groups of Jews who have fought democracy. We've had Jews who were socialists and Jews, sort of our roots. But and yes, there are the Stephen Smiths and other people who shall remain nameless. But for the most part, we believe in a government of, for, and by the people. We believe that we are set up for better success when people have a voice in the decisions that are being made on their behalf. And these days, there is so much division, so much silo thinking, and it's not good. It's not helpful. I was saying to somebody in relation to something else that there are three things necessary for a healthy, well-functioning democracy: an informed electorate, a separation of powers, and an independent judiciary. And I think Louis Brandeis would say we're not doing too well on the independent judiciary part. I think my dad would say we're not doing too well on the informed electorate part. And the truth is, you know, we have a real problem with the branches of our government functioning the way they should. You know, one of the things I put in my notes was that, I mean, there are a lot of negative perceptions about politicians these days, and probably people who think that politicians should have their own separate, very special set of al-Khaits for Yom Kippur. You know, for, you know, whether it's for the sin of taking oil money or for the sin of, you know, not protecting our oceans, for the sin of denying the outcome of the election, or the sin of, you know, reigning over a woman's right to control her own reproductive choices in a way that's not respectful at all. When you're in politics, everything touches you, and you touch everything. And you might think, well, local government, that's just picking up the trash and paving the roads. But the truth is, you are the closest level of government to the people. So when things happen in the community, if there's a hate incident, you know, if somebody suffers a terrible tragedy, you know, you are on the front lines. Congress is much more distant from those things, but has a lot more of those things coming at them because of the breadth of the constituencies that they represent. But anyway, I sort of, I'm not even going to use this anymore, because clearly when I set the little part of my iPhone that says, you know, your screen comes up in 3 seconds, you know, I wasn't thinking that I'd ever have to do a speech off of my phone. But one of the things that I talked about is some of the real leaders, you know, whether it's Abraham Joshua Heschel walking with Martin Luther King in Selma, you know, whether it's judicial giants like Louis Brandeis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whether it's labor leaders like Emma Goldman and Samuel Gompers and others, you know, Jews have been at the forefront of every major social activity, socially progressive activity. There are also a lot of conservative Jews. You know, I wouldn't put Madeleine Albright and Henry Kissinger in the same category, except that they were both secretaries of state. You know, both secretaries of state who had a history in the Holocaust. Madeleine Albright's a little more interesting because she didn't even know she was Jewish until she was in the midst of her confirmation hearings, and a reporter who was doing research brought her a dossier on her family. You know, so, you know, we've had proud Jews, we've had closeted Jews, we've had conservative Jews, we've had progressive Jews, but all of them are Jews, and all of them were raised with certain ethical, even if they're not aware of it, even if they weren't practicing Jews, I believe they all had something in their DNA that compelled them to be active in their communities, to stand up for what they believed in. And just because somebody believes in something different than what you believe in doesn't mean that their beliefs are not valid. I think also a thought just came to me, which is, we're not just the people of the book, we're the people of the debate. We're the people of the 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And I think that that heritage also gives us the confidence that whatever the issue is, whether we're arguing for something or against something, that it's safe to raise our voices, and it's important to weigh in on those issues. So, you know, this speech, which has been rambling due to my printer not serving me, and I will make my printer say, and I'll hate for doing that, for failing me so badly. But it started with, in my mind, is the good that we do politically, civically, socially, is it a prophylactic? Does it, you know, set us up a little bit better on the Day of Atonement? You know, we're not perfect. I did several things today for which I need to atone. I'm not sure whether that atonement will happen today or whether I'm just starting a new list for the coming year. But I was mindful of it. And, you know, and, you know, we don't get everything right all the time. We don't get it right individually. We don't get it right communally. We certainly don't get it right globally. But I think that this day and Teshuva and our Jewish soul helps us notice what we're noticing, take account when we fall short of our own aspirations for ourselves, let alone the world at large, and to try and do better. And so my hope is, as we go into the new year, that on so many levels in which we currently are struggling, in the way that people are treated in this country, in the way that we handle refugees, immigrant issues, in the way that we care about our environment and care about the generations to come and what kind of a world we're leaving for them. There is no platform on which progress does not need to be made. Progress, by its nature, is an evolutionary experience of doing a little bit better. You know, Marcia gave a beautiful, I don't know if it was a Dvar Torah, Dvarash, but about the environment on Rosh Hashanah. I'm sure there are people in this room, I'm not alone, who remember when you'd be riding down the thruway or the highway or wherever you were riding, and somebody would throw a McDonald's bag full of trash out the window into the countryside, like as if some magical fairy was going to come and pick it up. But that was absolutely acceptable. Like, nobody was horrified in the 1960s when people were throwing their trash out the window. You know, or I like to watch old shows, helps me fall asleep, anything that doesn't add another important thought to my mind. And I've been watching What's My Line? What's My Line with Gary Moore. And he's sitting there with a cigarette. Like, little kids are coming out and he's got a cigarette in his hand and he's like putting his hand behind their back with a lit cigarette and he's smoking and he's, you know, blowing the smoke. I mean, today...
Not just that, the cigarette companies sponsor.
Absolutely, absolutely. The cigarette companies and the aerosol companies. You know, so the reason that the chlorofluorocarbons, you know, were in, the, you know, destroying the ozone layer is because of all of the hairsprays and other aerosols that we loved. You know, all the plastics. You know, we talk about the plastic bags or the plastic bottles. I mean, when plastic was emerging, and a lot of these things came out of the science of the war. You know, I mean, like people came out of the war, they were engineers or they went to engineering school, they worked in aerospace, they worked in chemical companies, and like putting plastic everywhere. Like, it was just wherever we can put plastic, that would be great. You know, cover your floor with plastic, cover your furniture with plastic. They just couldn't get enough of plastic. And now, you know, we see what the long-term effects of those things are. And, you know, we're trying to reverse it. I also will say, as a woman who was in 6th grade before I was allowed to wear pants to school, which in Buffalo, New York, was a major quality of life upgrade during the winter months, seeing women on this show introduced as Mrs. Bob Smith. Like you don't even have your own first name, you know? This is Mrs. Herman Miller. Like, no. Like, it's, you know, but that, your identity was tied to your, see, today, I can write a check to the Jewish Collaborative. I can make a today I can make a donation to the Jewish Collaborative with my own credit card. I don't have to ask my husband if I can fill out a form and get a credit card. You know, we have made a lot of progress. And I think about, I heard Jesse Jackson speak a few years back, and he said something, obviously in a different context, but he said something which I had to scratch my head at first, but I think it's an important thought to hold on to. And that is, as bad as it is, it's better than it's ever been. And, you know, that's true. You know, Jews are still subjected to anti-Semitism. But now, when one incident happens, when one little thing happens, it gets broadcast so that people are made aware. This happened, we're not going to stand for this, and other people thinking about doing things like this know that there are protections for the community. You know, that wasn't the case. You know, when we were growing up, and for those in the audience, we're not that old here. Only to people younger than us do we seem old. But, you know, it wasn't that long ago that I remember there was an assembly at my high school. The name of the group was the Word of Life Singers. Now, that should have tipped anyone off. It was basically a religious revival. And of course, think about it. This was the 1970s, 74, 75. Kids were smoking pot, you know, like they were growing their hair longer, and they were listening to even more outrageous music, and people were concerned. And I believe the administration knew who they were bringing in and brought these people in to try and give us all a little bit of religion. But the man that was leading this basically said, you know, if you do not accept Jesus as your personal savior, you know, you will go to hell. And a group of us who were Jews got up and walked out, and we got detention. Like, that would not happen today. First of all, the Word of Life Singers would not be paid by the Kenmore Tonawanda Unified School District today to come in. But, you know, so I think that's a good, you know, I will even extrapolate, just to tie it all up with a nice Yom Kippur ribbon and bow. As bad as we are, we're better than we ever were. There's still room for improvement. I hope everybody has a good year.
Do you have time for questions?
Oh, yeah. I'd love questions.
So we have, first of all, I know there's a lot of people watching us online. People signed up to do that. So first of all, we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you for coming.
I have a question. Justin, is there a way, if somebody had a question virtually, could they type it to somebody and we could get it? I didn't think about that.
If not, if you have a question of me, you can email me at bethkrom, BETHKROM, @gmail.com after Yontif. Okay.
There you go.
All right.
But,
Questions in the room? Anybody?
I actually had a question that I was going to ask, but I forgot it for a second. But I was thinking, it's interesting. Can I just, without revealing much, these are my new friends, the Roosevelt Zimmermans, and I actually think you're sort of like a mixed poem of different ways of expressing your Judaism. Is that a fair way to say that? And I thought, you know, it was really interesting how you sort of acknowledge that we're everything, but at the same time, we're still really driven to be able to make our mark in a good way and enhance the communities that we live in. And I just was sort of interested if either of you had any thoughts about that.
I always have. I think much like Beth, always have thoughts. I'm the liberal half of the group, but I was struck by the presentation last night because we differ very much about how Judaism applies and what our obligations are in American society. there is no space between us on Israel. And that was, I actually hadn't realized that in terms of our commitment to Israel, we didn't have the same break, although I'm more willing to criticize.
I think there's quite a lot of, I mean, you know, not to get into a whole other discussion, but I think what's hard for a lot of Jews, if I could speak for the entire Jewish people, is that I think uniformly, other than, you know, certain outliers, Jews recognize the importance of Israel. Not just the importance of preserving Israel for Israelis, but that, as I think somebody did say last night, you know, our visas can be pulled at any moment. Like, we as Jews know that as good as we've had it in America, nothing guarantees that we are always going to be welcome here. And without an Israel, we are displaced. We are the diaspora yet again. So, and I imagine if I'm an Israeli, I'm thinking, well, okay, if you would like to have us here when you need us, we need you to support us now. Because if you wake up one day thinking, gosh, I wish that Israel was here, because all of a sudden I'm being forced out of yet one more country, and it's not here, you'll have yourselves to blame. I think a lot of American Jews think, but if our support, and maybe around the world, if our support of Israel is so important to you, do you have to listen to anything we say, or, you know, take into account any of our concerns? Because you know what? We're kind of like the family member that has to keep defending you. And you don't always do such a good job yourself. I mean, I think Israel would hopefully acknowledge public relations is not their strong suit, which is sad because they have so many things to lead with and that they have done that are awesome and amazing that nobody does truly understand. But when leaders or diplomats come on television and people are shown images of dead Palestinian children, and the response seems to lack any humanity at all, which does sometimes happen, I think we do ourselves such a disservice. As a politician, I would say just insert one line. The loss of human life under any circumstances is a tragedy. You know, we do not set out to cause harm, and it breaks our hearts that the way that warfare is being undertaken from the West Bank is to frankly put people in harm's way, because they know that this is going to win friends and influence people around the world. But it's not. It's always, you know, this sort of, it's not that the words are wrong, it's the way it's delivered. And you know, for a country that figured out how to put a camera in a pill that people can swallow, you know, to have a non-invasive tour of their lower GI, how can you not have people who can get on television and not reinforce the perception that Israel doesn't care, when we know that Israel cares? So anyway, you know, I do think that the more we talk, this would be my final thought, the more we talk, not just to people we agree with, but to people who have other ideas, the more we're willing to listen, the more they're willing to listen, and the more we use that part of our brain that engages in critical thinking, the better the future is going to be, because we right now do not feel safe having dialogue, discourse, and conversation around important issues that we should all feel free to discuss, things that affect people's lives, And I'm glad that the Jewish community is a place where not only issues and challenges are undertaken, but where we can disagree and still feel part of one community.
You know, it was very interesting to hear, by the way, two things really struck me last night when Peter said there are no more refugees, no more Jewish refugees, which I didn't think about, but of course.
Right.
And also that, and I think it ties into what you're saying, is that, you know, whatever problems there are, and let's take anti-Semitism, it's always going to morph. It morphed for centuries, and we morphed with it. I mean, that's the ingenuity. That's in the same way that if we get kicked out of somewhere and have to rebuild our lives, or even in a state, we'll do that, and we'll strategize how to create better than survival, better than just eking out a living. And that was what was so hopeful about the conversation last night, and I think it ties back into Jews and politics, back into yours, which is that no matter what the situation is, we will address it. It will not go unaddressed, and we will not walk to the gas chambers or whatever again. And I think that the gift of being able to be politically engaged in this country is something that I think we do take for granted, it's such a tremendous, I mean, just imagine some of your ancestors 4 generations back realizing.
Yeah, not even 4 generations. I mean, you know, my great-grandmother came to this country and you know, never would have imagined that her great-granddaughter would have been the mayor of such an awesome city like Irvine. But no, you're right. And I do tell people, I would love, regardless of the outcome, if we had elections where everybody voted so that we knew that the election truly reflected the voice of the people. Elections today are often being decided by people who don't vote rather than people who do vote. And because people don't feel informed, because they don't feel engaged, because they feel disconnected, it's become more important to not have the accountability of knowing you voted for someone who didn't do what you thought they would do than to educate yourself as best you can, exercise the vote that people fought and died for you to have, and then assume the accountability collectively, because nothing ever works out perfectly, you know, and we should not expect politicians to be perfect people any more than we expect anyone else. You know, I just wrote a book to help candidates called Run Like You've Won, and I say, you point to any business category, you know, any institution that's just perfect. It's just run perfectly. They never do anything wrong. But then, why don't you take that institution or that business and have them have to operate in complete public view where they can't actually talk to the other people that they're working with, and they have to come and make all their decisions in front of the public, and then see how it works out. Government is not a business. So for those people who say government should run like a business, I disagree. We're not a business. We are an institution created to support public needs and public interests. That's what government is. And to do it well, we need good people to run, win, and serve. And when we make the very institution of government a pariah, when we assign such negative attributes to the institution that supports our entire country, we do not get the best and the brightest. And there is an agenda behind it, and the agenda is to have those spaces available for the people who want to use government for their own interests. So that really has nothing to do with the talk today, but you gave me a microphone. I just wrote a book. I thought I would mention it.
Yes, you should
Anyway,
read this book. I
yeah.
just want to say, let me take this for a second. So, no, I don't want to take it away from you. We have just a few more minutes before Mincha, but I did want to know, did anybody have any questions for Beth for her talk? It's okay.
They're
Okay.
reserving their strength.
All right. So, well, but I thought Peter did have a question, and there it is.
It's more of a comment, I guess, what you're thinking. The one thing about what you were saying, Marcia, but it's also, I guess, about Jews, two Jews, three opinions. Well, Jews have always been self-critical. Go back to the Torah, they're self-critical. It's about morphing with time. Well, when Babylonia conquered Jerusalem, you read the prophets, they're self-critical. You know, instead of saying, oh, you know, ancient peoples, if your country failed, oh, your God failed. The Jews said, no, we failed our God. It's a totally different concept than any other people took. And that's what makes us, I believe, one of the reasons makes us a very unique people.
That's true.
I mean, I missed the beginning of your talk, but you talked
It
about...
was extraordinary.
I mean, but think about the influence of Jews in this country, be it in politics or entertainment or business. It's disproportionate to the rest of the population.
Absolutely. No, that's true.
Beth, do you really believe that having a Jewish state means that we'll never be marched to gas chambers again? I mean,
No,
if you look at the cleansing that's going on now in different regions.
No, I didn't say that.
I know,
I didn't say that.
She left the room.
But I'm used to people twisting my words because that's what happens in politics. No, I don't think anything guarantees that. However, without Israel there, the options, without Israel there, the question was, do I, believe, and believe me, nobody's ever asked me to be a spokesperson for Israel or Jews in Israel or whatever, so I'll probably be cited for even sharing my opinions. But do I believe that because Israel is there, Jews need not fear ever being, subjected to the kind of atrocities we've been subjected to? No. What I do believe is that if Israel isn't there, it's more likely, and if Israel isn't there when it happens, our options are very, limited. I think as much as we look back on the Holocaust and Germany in that period and feel like, how could that happen? I feel it could happen again. I do not feel anything has happened. I think we can see, as you say, situations around the globe where things are happening. This is even more provocative in the last 1 minute, but, we've always said never forget, and we've always held the Holocaust up as this sort of never before, and never since kind of a situation. And that's true on the face of it. But at some level, death is death. How you're murdering people, yes, it was highly sophisticated and extraordinary in that way. But death is death, and Jews have to care. I think there is a perception that we only care about our Holocaust, that we don't care about genocides that are happening around the globe or ways in which other peoples. I don't think that's actually true, at least not completely, but I think it's something we need to be aware of, because I do think image is more important than reality these days, and Jews have to understand that if we are ambivalent about how we are perceived, we are more at risk than if we aren't. Exactly. Jason, you're the last question.
If this is to do with this question, which is a common conversation.
Yeah.
If in 1936 there had been an Israel, and within that Israel there had been nuclear weapons, do you think the Holocaust would have happened?
Well, that's like an episode.
It's not just this, I'm saying, do you think
That's like an episode from Star Trek. But
is it even likely? Is there been a group of people in the world who've suffered from a terrible genocide, who've had a demona? No.
well, and again, the best conversations always start in the last 30 seconds of any presentation. but you're talking about a theoretical construct that didn't exist. And here's what I would say. if the Jews had not endured the Holocaust, and obviously we were not the only victims of the Holocaust, but if the Jews had not endured the Holocaust, and those Jews that survived had been willing to have their persecution and their tragedies understood by a larger world, a lot of good work to try and ensure that those types of atrocities would never happen again, wouldn't have occurred. So, you know, we wouldn't have chosen that persecution or any other persecution, but it is pretty awesome. Maybe this will be next year's talk. It's pretty awesome what survivors of the Holocaust, what they went on to contribute in this world, and how they took the worst experience a human being could ever imagine and turned it into, in many cases, something that was about not just making sure their own families had what they needed, but really making sure that it was a better world for everyone. So, on that note.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think, is this on? Oh, yes, it is.